we're seeing now is TV best practices probably making their way to YouTube because they worked and they exist for a reason. Welcome to the Catch Up powered by Uscreen. Kylie, what's new today?
Well, Colin and Samir have brought up the idea of seasonality for creators a couple times now, both on their podcast and in the published press creator economy report that just came out. This is the TV-like approach of creating a bunch of content up front, releasing it over time with gaps between seasons. And to me, it sounds like the complete opposite of the conventional wisdom of YouTube, where consistent quantity is how you succeed as a creator. So do you see this as a viable solution to the whole content hamster wheel problem?
I think that this is a difficult question to answer because I don't know that there is like one answer that's right, because creator burnout is a very, very, very subjective problem for most people. Like what might be burnout for somebody else might be a normal day for me, or what might be burnout for me might be a normal day for somebody else. So it's very, very, very subjective in that sense, because we're all built differently. We're all raised differently. We all have different thresholds for what feels exhausting and what feels like an average day. So if you're a daily vlogger like Casey Neistat, who is doing 5 videos a week or 7 videos a week for a year plus, or you look at Justin Rhodes, who's a customer of ours about to hit 1 million subscribers, and he posts 5 videos a week and has for years. And then you sit and talk with him and he just views it as like, I'm capturing my day. I'm like just finding the storytelling or the story in my day. So I think it's very subjective. Like when I talked with him, he didn't talk about burnout, but then you look at Casey Neistat and he will talk about burnout. He'll talk about the marriage problems it caused and the life imbalances that it caused. Or you look at Emma Chamberlain, who's like had to step away from YouTube because she was on that hamster wheel and it wasn't working for her. Whereas seasonality might be a much more compelling way to approach this. And I think that's what Colin and Samir have found for themselves. Like they got to show up once or twice a week on YouTube. They're doing a podcast, they're doing the published press, they're doing whatever else, hosting events and stuff. So they're on the content hamster wheel in that sense. And they're thinking, okay, we've got to find a way to make space for us, because interviewing people is something that's a little bit harder to batch shoot than like what we're doing, because we're not necessarily interviewing people all the time and all that kind of thing. So I think it's very subjective. I do think it is a viable solution for creators like Colin and Samir or Emma Chamberlain to like view things seasonally. And I think we've talked about this before, but YouTube is becoming the new TV. So it makes sense that we're going to see a shift in production towards what worked for TV, because that's what happens in the grand scheme of all this. Like Mr. Beast's content is not new. He's taking formats from like reality shows from the 2000s and applying it to YouTube. And what we're seeing now is TV best practices probably making their way to YouTube because they worked and they exist for a reason. So I think it probably is a viable solution for the right people, but it won't be for everyone. I don't think you can say it's universal.
That's a really good point, Daniel. And I think one of the things that hasn't been brought up in this conversation yet is audience expectation. And that is probably going to be what makes or breaks the seasonal approach. If your audience is expecting you to show up 5 days a week for your vlogs on homesteading, right? I think you've got to clearly communicate what those seasons are going to be.
I agree. And while you were talking, I actually thought about my dog. I'm not trying to directly compare my dog's behavior with audience behavior, but I think there are some parallels in that. You mentioned setting expectations for your audience. And when you get a dog and you're raising it and training it, you have to set expectations for the dog for what is acceptable and what's not. I think it's the same thing with an audience. Like you have to treat them and set expectations with them so that they're not disappointed when there are abnormalities in the schedule, or you've just got to prepare them in that sense. Like you set the expectation for your dog, you set the expectation for your audience, and there will be times where that has to change. And sure, there's an adjustment period where the behavior is one thing and you want it to go to this other thing. And there's going to be that kind of transition period between the two. But if you do it the right way and you lead confidently and strongly with that audience, they're going to respond in a positive way at the other end.
Is seasonality something that a small creator can do from the start? Because the names that you brought up, like Justin Rhodes, who's almost about to hit 1 million, or Casey Neistat and Emma Chamberlain, they have massive audiences that will be there waiting when they come back, even if they take a break. for smaller creators who are still developing that audience, there might not be an audience waiting when they come back, and that consistency is the only thing keeping you in front of their screen. So Daniel, what do you think about that?
That's a great question. I think seasonality looks different when you're a smaller creator. I think it can still exist in maybe you post once a month, maybe you post once every 2 weeks to keep that kind of seasonality, or at least give yourself more space to breathe so that you're not pushing yourself up against burnout early on. I just think it looks different for different people early on. And you also have like a boost of energy when you first start, and you're like, there's a little bit more drive and kind of an intangible energy that comes from just starting, especially as you start to gain momentum. That kind of like doubles down in a sense, which is, I think, where the burnout really, like, that's where it starts to get dangerous. So I think seasonality looks different. However, I also think just because there are a few paths that work to success with creation does not mean there are not new paths. There are new creators right now forging new paths that nobody has ever taken before to be a successful creator. And we just have to keep in mind that, like, we don't have to do what everybody else has done in order to be successful. It can look different for you than it does for the person next to you, and that's totally fine. And I think the seasonality thing will play into that. And there will be a creator who comes up that, like, will post a flurry of 4 videos in a month, and then we don't hear from them for 3 months, and then they post another batch and they explode regardless of that inconsistency.
So we've talked about YouTube in this conversation so far a lot with seasonality and how it may be difficult because of the way the algorithms work right now. But there are other platforms where that's more of an accepted norm. With podcasts, we have different seasons of podcasts all the time. And if you're posting those podcasts onto your own membership site or something like that, that's where I think seasonality can really come into play. And then with YouTube, you can maybe go Alex Hormozy style and repurpose 20 clips from that podcast to keep up the consistency.
An interesting perspective on this was we both subscribed to Chris Sharpe's newsletter. Chris Sharpe works with Yoga with Adrian kind of behind the scenes, and he has a newsletter that's fantastic. We'll put a link to it in the description of this video. But one of the things he talked about in a recent newsletter he sent out was that a cooking channel he used to work with, they started that channel with seasonality, where it was like from basically during the school year calendar. So like August or September to May, they published consistently, and then they would take the summers off. And then they got advice from YouTube that was hurting their channel and hurting their views and hurting their audience. And so they stopped doing that and they started publishing year round. And before they knew it, they were burnt out and they got sick of it and they stopped making content for the channel altogether. But what got them to their success point was that seasonality, because it gave them the breath of fresh air that they needed in the summers to have some creative freedom, have some time to unwind and not think about it and decompress from everything throughout the rest of the year. And when they changed that to going year round, that's what led to the kind of the downturn of that channel and their experience with it, because they got advice that didn't work for them. And now he's kind of taking that into consideration with future content endeavors and really focusing on seasonality and the sustainability of the channel over maybe advice that would tell you to just push through to get the views and the numbers and hit all the data and whatever it is. So I thought that was super interesting. Again, check out that newsletter, the link in the description. I think it's really, really great stuff.
All right, now I want to hear from all of you. Let us know in the comments whether you're going to use seasonality as your approach to creating content, or how you keep from burning out if you don't. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.